Hi, this is Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm today. I'm so glad you're here. And for May the 4th this year, I thought I would create Wrecker and Omega's Tooka doll from The Bad Batch. And if you're a Star Wars fan and you haven't watched Clone Wars or The Bad Batch, I highly recommend these shows. They are amazing. The Tooka doll's name is Lula, and here's a picture of Lula from the show. This is from Wookieepedia, and here is Disney's version of the Tooka doll. You can see that this was originally $26.99 and it apparently went down to $7.98 on clearance, but is no longer available. I did find one person selling it on eBay for $64.99, but we can make it for much, much cheaper than that. To start, I needed to make a pattern for Lula, so I started by trying to sketch the doll out on a grid so that I could get the proportions correct. And then I went through a number of prototypes made out of paper and muslin. You can see one of my later prototypes here. So finally I settled on this pattern, and you can get this pattern from my blog. I would say this pattern is not perfect, but you can see how I put the doll together with this pattern, and I'll talk about the parts of the pattern that I think could be improved in case you want to make this. Now I'm going to make Lula's body out of this black cotton duck fabric, which I got at Joann Fabrics. And because I'm not super confident with the pattern, I'm going to start by making just half of the doll. And we're going to make this doll by making basically the front and the back and then putting them together. So I am going to fold over the edge of this fabric. This is a yard of fabric, so this piece is 36 inches by 7 inches. And I'm going to trace onto this the bottom of the body, the top of the body, the head, and the top of the arm piece and the top of the leg piece. It's important, if you have a fabric that has a right and a wrong side, that you fold it in half when you cut these pieces, because they are symmetrical pieces. The front basically has a seam running down the middle. So I traced these pieces onto the fabric with a pencil, and then I just cut them out, mostly with scissors. Now, I think that the actual Lula in the show might be made of more of a leather or faux suede, or possibly even a velvet. The only black velvety fabric that I had was much too old and difficult to cut for me to make the doll out of that fabric, so that's why I settled on this cotton duck. Now for the red parts of Lula, I found this fat quarter at the Dollar Tree. I was just walking down the craft aisle and there it was. It is a red velvety fabric, and when I saw it I thought that is perfect for Lula. Of course you can get a red velvety fabric anywhere. I was just lucky enough to get this fat quarter at the Dollar Tree. And this is going to be just enough for this pattern. So I'm cutting all of the red pieces out of this right now to make sure I can fit them all. So all of the red pieces are 4 ear pieces, 2 for each ear. And then the bottoms of both the hands and the feet are the same pattern piece, so 8 of those. I tried to make these pattern pieces symmetrical, but I don't think they are completely symmetrical, so I'm making sure that I cut them so that the piece is folded so that they are opposite to each other, so I can put them up against each other when I sew them. Now there's a tiny bit of fabric left over. We need to save that so we can cut Lula's eyes out of that. Now the red ear pieces get attached to the head, so I'm just pinning these pieces in place, and again trying to make sure that, because they're not perfectly symmetrical, that I am matching them up in the same direction. So I'm matching them up to point outwards a little bit. And then the red, what I call paw pieces, are going to go at the ends of the arm and leg pieces. The arm pieces are the longer black, almost square shape, and the leg pieces are the shorter black rectangles. And I'm just marking the paw pieces that I used for the legs because I cut them out separately from the arm pieces so that my legs will match up when I cut out the other black pieces. Now I am going to pin the right sides of the two body pieces together, the top and the bottom body piece. And you can see there's an angle there. That's to give Lula its little tummy. So with all of those pieces pinned together, I'm just going to run a seam across each of those pieces. I'm not bothering to back stitch over the ends because there's going to be a seam around the whole piece, and that should go over this stitching. Now I'm just using the width of my presser foot for almost all of my seams. There's only one place where I don't use the width of the presser foot, and I'll mention that when I get to it. So that's my seam width. It's somewhere between 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch seam width, and you can use whatever seam width you like or feels right to you. Now, once I have the red ears, I'm going to put the two head pieces together and stitch that seam. There is a dart in the head at the bottom where the chin is, so I'm basically going to stitch straight down the head, and once I get to the bottom where that dart is, just lift my presser foot and turn the head and put it back down and then stitch along the dart. So it just sort of veers off at a little bit of an angle down at the bottom. Now I do recommend pressing all seams. I'm not going to show you every time I press something, but I did press the two body pieces, those seams, and now I'm going to sew the body piece together. So that's that seam down the middle of the doll. And with that sewn, there is a dart on each of those front body pieces, front bottom body pieces. So I'm just sort of matching those up now that I've got the piece sewn, and I'm going to stitch those two darts. Now with the body sewn together and the head sewn together, I'm now going to attach the head to the body. The body, you'll notice, has almost like little shoulders. So I'm going to attach the head to the neck part before the shoulders, but it's not the same shape. So I'm curving the head piece along that body piece, and we're just going to sew that seam. Now this is one of the places where I think the doll could be a little bit better. I feel like the neck is maybe a little bit too long on the doll, and that the head should be lower down on the body. So maybe there shouldn't be those shoulders. Now I was fairly satisfied with the doll at this point, so I folded over another 7-inch piece of the cotton duck, and I put all of the pieces for the back of the doll on there. So again, the head, the two body pieces, the leg piece, and the arm piece, and I cut those out and sewed the red pieces to the ends of each of those, so the ears and the paws on the arms and the leg. Once those were all sewn and the seams were pressed, I put the arms and the legs together, clipped them together, and then I sewed around them. Now with these, I left an opening at the end, the black end, the part that's going to connect to the body, for stuffing. So just leave a little bit of a gap in the black. There isn't very much black on the legs, so I left one entire black side of the legs unsewn. And I did backstitch here because I don't want that seam to rip open where I'm going to be stuffing. And with those all sewn, I clipped them to the doll. I clipped the arms just below the shoulders, and I clipped the legs pretty much right up to that center seam on the bottom. Now, a mistake that I made is I didn't have the legs mirror images of each other. I didn't notice that the little feet weren't symmetrical, so my poor little doll has 2 left feet. And I then just basted those on, so I did a little bit less than the size of my presser foot when I basted those on. So I just wanted them attached. However, here is another mistake that I made. I didn't fold those seams where I left it open for stuffing. I should have folded and pressed those seams in. And I didn't do that, and in some places they got sewn a little bit open near the bottom. So fold your seams and press them where the opening is, and make sure that they're folded when you sew them or baste them onto the doll. Now for the back of the doll, I sewed the head together the same way I sewed the head for the front, and I sewed the body together the same way I sewed the body for the front, but I did not sew the head to the body. There are two reasons for this. One is that's the opening that I'm going to leave for stuffing, the back of the neck where the head meets the body. And the other is I did not trust myself to sew it evenly, the same as the front, and so I thought this was a good place to leave an opening for stuffing and to ensure that the head and the body were aligned with each other front and back when I put the doll together. Now, Lula has a white face, so I've got a little cutout for the face here, and I've decided that for the face, I'm going to use this white tote bag that I got at the Dollar Tree, just a little corner of that fabric. You can use any white fabric for this. I wanted something that was a little bit rough looking. So that's why I picked this. It looks sort of like burlap almost, but it's white. I don't have a lot of white fabric, and something I really didn't want to use was felt. Now I'm going to use this fusible interfacing. It's double-sided fusible interfacing to attach this. This fabric from this bag is going to fray really easily, and I'm hopeful that the fusible interfacing will hold it together. You can see I have just sort of a few random scraps of this interfacing, but it is enough. So the way to use this is to trace your pattern onto it and then iron it to your fabric and then cut it out. It makes the fabric stiffer and easier to cut, and because you can draw on the interfacing, you'll see the shape that you want to cut out. So I traced around the face, and then I ironed it to the bag, and then I cut it out. And you should just iron this stuff according to package directions. This isn't the one that I usually use. I usually use a Wonder Under double-sided fusible interfacing, but this is the one that I had. So I also did 4 eyes. So 2 of the eyes are full size, and 2 of the eyes are just slightly smaller, and I drew those with a compass. You're going to attach the full-size eyes to your black fabric and the smaller eyes to the red fabric. And then the doll also has some lines for a mouth, so I cut some lines out of the interfacing and fused those to the black fabric. Once I had all of the pieces, I just centered the white piece on the doll face. Before I did that, I really flattened the face out as much as I could because it does have that dart at the bottom. And keeping in mind there's going to be a seam around the sides and the top, but no new seam on the bottom. So it isn't going to be exactly centered. You might want to orient it a little closer to the bottom of the doll. So I fused that on, and then I fused the eyes and the mouth onto that. Now somehow I seem to have lost the footage of me clipping the back to the front of this doll, but basically I just put the arms and the legs inside, so folded them in on the front of the doll, and then lined up the seams of the bottom of the doll and the top of the doll, lined up the ears, and clipped it. Again, it's left open at the neck. And then I just started on the side of the doll, and I just sewed all the way around the doll. Now, at the ears, my ears didn't line up perfectly, so this is where I used a slightly smaller seam allowance, just so that I could make the ears as big as possible. The only tricky part about this is once you reach the neck. So I did have to pull the neck pieces together and clip them as if I had stitched it together, so that I could lay down the edges of it and sew that neck together. Now, once that was all done, I turned Lula right side out. That was pretty easy. The ears were maybe the hardest part, but they weren't that bad. And then I stuffed the doll mostly with fiberfill. The head is stuffed with fiberfill, and the arms and the legs are stuffed with fiberfill. Now, the body, I started with fiberfill, but then whenever I sew and I have little scraps of fabric or thread, I save them in a bag. And you can see that bag here. So once I got to stuffing the body, started it with fiberfill, but then I filled in a lot of the body with just some of these bits of fabric. In fact, some of them are prototype Lulas. And then I stuffed around it with the fiberfill so that the doll would feel soft, and the fiberfill helps you fill in the edges better. But for the bulk in the middle of the body, I just used old fabric scraps. Now, the shape of the head for this doll is something I'm not completely pleased with. If you look at the doll in the Bad Batch TV show, it really doesn't have those little cheeks that stick out, and I feel like my cheeks are too pointy. So if you're making this doll, I would either lose those cheeks entirely, because the shape is really in the white part in the TV show, not in the black part. Or if you are going to make it, I would make those cheeks a little bit bigger, not quite so pointy. And now, once Lula was nice and stuffed, I just hand-stitched those seams closed. And the really fun part, which makes this look like the Bad Batch doll, is dirtying up the doll's face a little bit. And I'm just going to do this with a little bit of acrylic paint. I have an apple barrel pewter gray here and an apple barrel black. And I have a little bit of that fabric off to the side, and I tested this out on that fabric before I did it on the doll. I wanted to make sure it didn't run or just look terrible. So basically what I'm doing is I am taking a little bit of the gray paint onto my brush, and then getting a lot of the paint off of the brush, and then dabbing it around the edges of the doll's face, trying to avoid getting it on the black, and dabbing it up into the face in some places as well. And then I'm taking the black, doing the same thing, getting it off of the brush, and then dabbing it basically over the gray. And then I brushed it to finish it, because it looked more smudged that way. So I just brushed over it with the brush to smooth it out some. And here's the finished doll. I'm pretty pleased with how it came out. I've told you the parts that I would change a little bit, and if you make one, maybe you'll make those changes, maybe you'll tell me about it in the comments. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you enjoy this sort of content, please subscribe to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with me today. Take care.